Okay, well, I'm not 100% sure where we left off last time. But perhaps we could start with something that I've heard uh, spoken of recently in a few different contexts, where the distinction has been made between the two sides in the political debate. And when I say the political debate, I really mean any political debate uh, that one would find logging on to the internet, watching on YouTube. Um, these debates that are often, I suppose, seen as between right and left. I don't think it's that simple, but in an effort to sort of distinguish between what propaganda is relative to what is not propaganda, this is what one will occasionally hear. And that is that while one side simply spreads ideological misinformation, the other side communicates facts, cites sources, presents a case based on evidence. In other words, one side is being dishonest, intentionally lies, misrepresents the truth in order to further their own interests or the interests of whoever's paying them. To further the interests of whatever cause they're biased to, while the other side, while they may have interests, even a bias, bases their arguments on truth. Truth here being a relative term, but truth based on facts, data, what we're actually seeing. And the obvious example is Palestine and Israel. What we see in terms of facts and data are a civilian death toll in the tens of thousands. We see, we hear accounts from doctors who are treating children with sniper wounds, who have children turn up dead with bullets in the head and so on. I mean, I don't want to cite the data and the accounts because we all know what it is, and one can very easily log on and hear reporting, for example, based on what the United Nations says, what Amnesty International says, what the Court of Justice says, and so on. So there are these rulings, these positions, especially when one looks at history. All you need to do is read modest variety of sources on, say, the history of the essentially the invasion of Palestine by Israel, by the Zionists in the creation of the state of Israel, the human rights abuses and so on. I mean, all these accounts and testimonies regarding the apartheid and so on, these words, genocide, etc., are based upon facts and data, right? Now, I'm saying facts and data uh, because that's what other people are saying, right? I mean, we see the numbers, right? And the logic, in my opinion, is much more interesting, right, than the facts and data. Yes, there are facts and data that say that 40,000 plus 45,000 Palestinians have been killed in Gaza in the bombing campaign, right, by Israel. This indiscriminate bombing campaign. Then we see, or hear rather, Israeli spokespeople defending this kind of campaign, this kind of attack on the basis of a right to defend itself, on the basis of a need to target civilian infrastructure because Hamas use civilians as human shields and they're hiding in there, and therefore this is the only way to go about it. Now, this logic in itself is the interesting thing to me because it's obviously bullshit. Right? There's there are other ways, especially when you're supposedly the most moral and best equipped military forces in the world. There must be ways to assassinate leaders and put into play special operations to take out Hamas members without all this collateral damage. Right? So I mean, it's from the argument that's being made, one can clearly see that there's a serious problem. Now that's something that's an argument that can be made even if we didn't have all the facts and the data, right? If you're just having a conversation at university with your lecturer or with other students about ethics and morality, you could discuss these things abstractly and still arrive at the conclusion that killing thousands and thousands of civilians, or let's say killing 10 innocent civilians to kill one terrorist is flawed. Now, in the public discourse around Israel and Palestine, it's interesting, isn't it, that there are still people who support this logic of killing 10 innocents in order to kill one terrorist. Now, the logic in itself is flawed, and this is something that people, I think, have to watch out for, and which is very obvious to anyone who is paying attention. It's a kettle logic, right? Because it'll be, first, yes, Hamas uses civilians as human shields. Therefore, we have no choice but to kill civilians in order to kill Hamas militants. The next argument will be, besides, there are no innocent Palestinians anyway. So this is the kind of kettle logic that immediately one should prick up one's ears when hearing all these arguments, right? And it's not backed by facts and data. So let's just add that in there, right? All the accounts given about the murdered babies that Hamas murdered babies and beheaded babies and raped women and so on. These are all very familiar tropes, and they're thrown around a lot. Of course, none of it has actually been verified. There's no evidence of it. Now, I'm not saying this because I'm trying to convince anyone that it's true or not true, right? I don't necessarily think that the Palestinian population is entirely without psychopaths and rapists, because there are no societies, no populations that are without psychopaths, rapists, and so on and so on, right? So it's not the point. The point is that there are no facts and data to show that these crimes were committed, right? So if we have to, from a certain perspective, agree that they didn't happen, right? Just because someone says that they happened doesn't mean that we can then say, oh, well, they happened, or even say that it's plausible that they happened, because in the absence of evidence, well, if we're living in a society where evidence counts for something, counts for everything, then we have to say that the spread of this information is just spread, right, on the basis of it having been said. Now, there is even evidence to show that people who have claimed to see mutilated babies by Hamas, when asked to present their evidence, couldn't do so. This has happened. It's there, right? Watch the Al Jazeera investigation of October 7th, right? Now, this leads to leads to a plausible demarcation between one side and the other, as one side being spreading misinformation or disinformation, while the other side is committed to the facts, right? What the evidence is. Now, it may be that the side committed to evidence can also have a bias which is moral or ethical in nature. All right. So, yes, there's lots of stats and data to show that a genocide's being committed. All right. But you have to go a step further. I'm not saying this is a bad thing to do. You have to go a step further to then say that that's wrong, that genocide is wrong, that it's immoral. Right. So, in this instance, we're using facts and data to make an argument, to ground an anti-genocidal bias within facts and data. So, it may be, for example, from the Israeli position, even though they deny genocide, they don't always deny it, and often are sometimes quite outspoken about the fact that this is a campaign to ethnically cleanse Greater Israel of the Arab population. And there's plenty of, again, facts and data. You can go onto YouTube and look up Israeli TV, listen to Jewish podcasts, and just listen to them and hear what they have to say on the matter. And there is a very pro ethnic cleansing rhetoric, even genocidal. So now this is different, right? Because here it's not necessarily dishonesty. It's on the other side of the argument, but there is a moral tone to all this, right? Because Palestinians are bad and Israel is good. All right, so there is a moral tone to it. And ideology often has this ideology, propaganda, has this moral tone. It really depends on the population that you're trying to convince. So what you have, effectively, I mean, for example, when you watch press conferences, right, of politicians speaking, you listen to Anthony Blinken speak, for example, everything that comes out of his mouth is a lie. On the other hand, you listen to Lavrov or Putin. Now, it's not to say that they're not lying, but a lot of what they say is consistent. It's not necessarily changing. Right? Now, I can say this not because I'm an expert, but because I'm a consumer of analytical, political analysts. I'm a consumer of expert texts that look into these sorts of things. Right? So I consider myself to be somewhat well informed. Right? I'm not anywhere near as well informed as the people that I read and the people who teach me, but I consider myself more or less well informed of the basics. And my particular area where I have some skill is simply just listening to how people speak. Quite apart from facts and data, I was very prepared to believe that rapes and beheadings of babies happened after October 7th. What would possess me not to believe it? I mean, terrible things happen every day and they're committed in all parts of the world. What makes the Palestinian population any less susceptible to such perverse behavior? Some might argue Palestinians wouldn't do that. But I mean, that's really not the point, and it's not a convincing or a serious argument. What leads to doubt is the way, if one listens to the arguments that are made to this effect, the failure to produce any evidence of it, well, at that point one can say, well, okay, maybe this is a lie. Nevertheless, there are people in the world who have internalized this narrative and haven't questioned it. Now, one thing I want to talk about today is the Oreshnik missile. Because there's been a lot said about the Oreshnik missile. It's still shrouded in mystery as of 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 9th of December 2024. I haven't really looked at the news today, but as far as I know, we're still a little bit in the dark as to what the hell this thing is, right? There are the basics that we know. And I'm not an expert, but I encourage anyone who's interested in this to consult Daniel Davis' deep dive, to consult Andrei Machinov, to consult all the usual analysts who comment on these things, like Scott Ritter, Larry Johnson, and Jacques Bode, but Ted Postol is another one, right, who's someone who is a weapons expert. He consulted in the White House. I don't know all the details, but for all intents and purposes, he's a very knowledgeable guy. He's an interesting guy because he often comes on these interviews and says, I don't really know. And he's very careful about what he says because he doesn't want to presume anything. And he often presents himself as someone who only works with the facts. And I got a little bit, how should I put it, depressed when I listened to him recently, and his analysis, the outcome of his analysis, was not what I had expected. Right now, I was a bit disappointed. Now, I have to think about the way that I express this, because I don't want to be an agent of misinformation. Right? I don't want to spread an idea of the situation that would lead people to say, doubt the capabilities of Russia, which I'm convinced, based on the people that I trust to deliver fact and evidence-based information, people who are experts in this field. I've formed an opinion that leads me to have an idea or confidence in the military capability of Russia. Now, Ted Postol, who I've been led to believe is an intelligent man who knows what he's talking about, or at least knows what he doesn't know. But watching him, and the first time I watched him, it was when the Oreshnik missiles first were launched and delivered. And one thing that shocked me about the fact that he was giving an analysis of this was that he didn't have the basic information that had been circulated. From what I could tell, I'd seen more footage than he had, which is odd, right? Because he's the weapons expert. Nevertheless, what I do believe about Ted Postol is that he works with the information he's got, and he doesn't then perhaps make gross speculations based on a particular bias. I don't know, right? Andrei Martynov does talk about Ted Postol as if he were spreading Ukrainian propaganda. Now, this was my sense listening to Ted Postol. Not that he was a sympathizer with Zelensky or the Ukraine or whatever, but that unwittingly he was spreading Ukrainian propaganda. Because his ultimate conclusion, if you will, was that this weapon didn't appear to be very effective. Sort of changed tunes from the first moments that he starts talking about it to the latter moments. But if you watch his analysis, it's a bit strange, right? Because at no point does he question the validity of the evidence he's been given that's somehow ended up in his possession, which is evidence that is all over the internet, which is of a couple of buildings, with the ceilings caved in, or a house, on fire, and so on. That supposedly photos of Dnipro, where the Oreshnik missile struck. Now, based on all the information, the trajectories, the speeds, the temperatures, the kinetic nature of the warhead and so on, and the pictures of the ground and the pictures of the damage that I just mentioned, Ted Postol reverse engineers the situation, the missile, and comes to a conclusion. But what's interesting about it is that the conclusion that he reaches is based on material that actually hasn't really been verified. Right? It's based on evidence that hasn't really been verified. There's one example. I'm not an expert, but there is one photo that the Ukrainians took of, I think it was like the fuel system or something, supposedly. Right? Now, I've heard different accounts of this. Some people said that this looked like it could have been wreckage, not from the missile, not from the missile itself, but because it was a missile base, it could have been wreckage from some of the machinery or equipment that was destroyed by the Oreshnik missile. Now, Ted Postol looks at this thing and says, by my calculations, what it could be is, I forget what he says, but like the engine or the fuel system of the actual Oreshnik itself. So already I begin to wonder about this man's credibility when he just takes a photo as it's given to him and doesn't actually question whether this could be something else. Now, that's my problem. And that's why I'm not inclined to trust Ted Postol's assessment of the Oreshnik. Now, he does make a lot of convincing points, right, about how, there's a lot to learn about what he says in regards to how, hypersonic, how superheated metal material hurtling almost perfectly fucking vertical, shout out to Rick and Morty, at hypersonic speeds towards the Earth. There's a whole bunch of stuff there that you can learn about how, like what's likely to happen on impact and so on. I mean, he said something rather surprising, like, these things are only going to penetrate maximum a couple of meters, where if you hear someone else speak about it, if you listen to Andrei Martynov speak about it, these things are more likely to be penetrating up to 200 meters and completely obliterating everything into dust, right? The idea that we're given is that what these things can do is essentially vaporize, right, 7 square kilometers in a couple of heartbeats. Now, depending on where you sit in relation to all this, it is going to influence how sympathetic you are to Postol's account versus how sympathetic you are to other people's accounts, right? And so if you're really wanting the Oreshnik missile to be a potential alternative to nuclear war, then Postol's account is depressing. All right. It's depressing. And it's also potentially irresponsible if he's formed what this missile is based on the very lackluster collection of information that he has. Now, this is the thing about Ted Postol that ought, I think, to be something to be wary of. He presents himself as someone who doesn't understand why people have him on his shows, have him on their shows, right? Want to hear him speak because he doesn't know very much and he just repeats himself, right? This is his, I think, a little bit feigned modesty, because at the end of the day, what you get is a man who has, in his words, a very good first order understanding of what this thing, meaning the Oreshnik missile, is and what its destructive capacity is as well. Now, he's gone from someone who doesn't know much to someone who knows more than anyone else very, very quickly. So I would reserve my judgment on what this missile is. I'm more inclined instead to pay attention to the discourse around this system. All right. That's what I'm more concerned with. Now, I will only be speculating now, but from where I sit, I also just want to make one thing clear. Ted Postol originally said that we'd seen nothing like this ever before. Right. Very quickly changes his tune. In any case, I'm not here to argue that this missile is everything that the Russians say that it's cracked up to be. Right? I don't know. Right? One thing about Ted Postol is that he's surprised, right, that it's not, in his estimation, as effective as Putin said it was, right? Because Ted Postol said that, well, Putin's not the kind of guy to go out there and talk about something that, he doesn't have a good understanding of, or to just bullshit about. So this is Ted Postol saying this, and this is where we have to be careful. I think when we're listening to a lot of these different points of view, it's not as simple as, you just got the pro-Ukrainians on one side or pro-Americans on one side, and on the other side you've got the Russians, pro-Russians, or blah, 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 and then you've got the realists. No, within every side you've got people who are going to start making some mistakes. And that includes Putin as well. And I think that's what Postol's saying, right? That Putin's possibly made an error here. But I think if anyone's made the error, it's Postol. Now, some indication of this, of the validity of this point of view, is that, it seems like Dnipro has been cordoned off. We're not actually able to see what happened. We have a few very unconvincing photos of a couple buildings, couple houses, whatever. And that's it. It is an incredibly large area, and as far as I can tell, if it was as ineffective as Postol is saying, we would have a lot more evidence of that. All right, America and Ukraine would be saying, "Hey, look, everybody, Dnipro still stands. All right, just a scratch." Now we don't have that. In fact, when it comes to the rhetoric of America, the rhetoric of Ukraine, the rhetoric of Israel, we never get any of that. All we get is talk, right, and no evidence. Now, in the case of Russia, it's a very interesting flip, because with Russia, what we tend to get is evidence without the talk. Now, I'm not saying that there's no talk, right? But it's a bit like, all right, Russia doesn't really show off, all right? So Andrei Martynov says, so he claims that this is a trait of Russia, not to really show or demonstrate. It's more of a cool operator. It just does, right? And to some extent, I'd like to believe that, because Russia has shown itself to be the most reasonable party of all who are involved at the moment. And anyone who contests that, I really would like to hear why. Why contest that? On what basis is that not abundantly clear? All one has to do is actually watch and listen to the discourses. Right? Now, I hear people say Putin's evil and blah, 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 but I'm yet to hear why that is exactly. I don't know. Even John Mearsheimer said that what Putin did when he invaded Ukraine was a war crime at some point. He said that. I don't remember where or when. And I found myself asking, well, why exactly was that a war crime too? Is it a war crime to invade another country? I don't know international law, right? I'll just admit that right now. Got a little bit more study to do on that. But it seems that on the one hand, Mearsheimer adamantly defends Russia's actions in all throughout, and all throughout the war, and beforehand anticipated that this would happen, and that Russia would essentially have a right, a very plausible case to resist what he calls NATO expansion, or to resist to intervene in Ukraine on the basis of the fact that it was NATO expansion threatening Russia's borders that was at stake. So then where does the war crime come into it? Okay, well, we can say that, when Putin went in and intervened, I don't know, maybe he killed lots of innocent people or something like that. And he may very well have done that. Right? I don't know. I haven't seen evidence of it, but to be honest, I haven't really looked. But I do look for evidence for what's happening now. I try my best to try, to understand, whether, like, who's actually winning, right? Because you hear America talking about this as if, like Russia's losing, and then any day now, Russia's going to have to concede. And, you hear the other side saying the same thing. But apparently, the evidence that we have is that, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian soldiers have died. Of Ukrainians have died. Call them soldiers. I mean, they're recruiting, apparently, now 18-year-old kids. Or at least they're trying to pass the law that will enable them to be able to do that. But in any case, I don't claim to, I'm not there on the ground, so I don't claim to know exactly what's going on. All I can say is what I hear. And there are people that I listen to who speak from experience and who present evidence as their means of communicating knowledge. And on the other hand, there are people who seem to be spreading an idea without uh, without having leveraging that idea, that ideology, on any evidence. And if they're not doing that, then the assumption, like the thing I have to assume is that they're communicating it to an audience that they believe don't require evidence, or who aren't interested in evidence, but who are taken in by uh, a narrative that they want to believe, and they're willing to believe it um, readily. Now, the other reason why I brought up this Ted Postol thing was because it depressed me. And when it depressed me, I realized, holy shit, okay, why would this depress me? Like, what is it about it that I don't like hearing about this? And, call me crazy or call me whatever you want. I have my money, if I were a betting man, which I'm not, on Russia here prevailing over the American hysteria. My view of the conflict is that America is acting with impunity. They're pushing the boundaries hysterically all the way up to the point until basically to see how far they can go. And Russia, Putin in this case, is setting a limit. All right, so now I have a lot of issues with America, but I also love America. I've never declared that love till now, but there's so many things that have come out of America that have shaped who I am and that I love. Right? It's just a fact. But I hear very clearly a discourse coming out of America that's hysterical. You have an argument that essentially runs something like this. Russia is a gas station with nuclear weapons. Russia's weak. But then on the other hand, Russia wants to take over the entire world. They're our biggest threat. So how can something that's so weak be also such a threat? Not to mention the fact that meanwhile you're poking the bear to make it lash out, to make it to actually inflate, cause it to inflate, and to, as a consequence of that, verify your claim that it's a threat, so that you can then neutralize it. It seems like a pretty American thing to do. When I say American, I mean obviously American political thing to do. I don't even necessarily mean militarily American, because I think the military really has been doing what the people in power over in the States have in mind. The military's been, I've got great respect for the armed services and so on. So I don't want to go down that road, but who to point the finger at here? Well, I mean, there is a structure, and I think that structure is something that we can clearly see is an unreason is on its way towards maximum unreason, right? And I think it's the fact that Jacques Bode talks about this. I think in his book, he talks about the 10 surprises of all this, and I think of the Ukraine war, or the end of America, the end of American hegemony, that Europe's complicity in all this. But what we're looking at is really capitalism, I think, doing what capitalism does, which is take itself to its absolute extreme limits, to the point where it begins to break down. And the limits, it seems to me, might be, we don't really know if these are the limits yet, at the border between Ukraine and Russia. Anyway, I'll move on again. So return to this Ted Postol problem, because it made me depressed. Because obviously I've got a bias here. It's true. I've got my the team that I'm rooting for, so to speak. There's I'm rooting for it because it's because what I see prevailing in the Russian discourse is a sober analysis, and I'm seeing something in the discourse of Putin that that appeals to me, perhaps in the same way that there are things in the discourse of Trump that appeal to people in America, and even appeal to me as well. And they're not the same thing, but in the most general terms, this is coming from someone who was born and raised and lives in a country with one of the most despicable fucking political, the most despicable collection of politicians at the moment. Politics is an absolute joke here. It's very similar to America, I think. That essentially what Trump represented, or not actually. Let's get rid of that word represented. Because what he represents, who the fuck knows, right? At the end of the day, with him. But what he actually is someone who speaks in a very unpolitical way. Right? He introduces into political discourse, which is it even a discourse? I don't know. A violent dissimulation of that discourse, introduces a kind of everyman into politics. Of course, I think that this is really overblown in America, because I think Trump is a very rich man, a billionaire, and I think that we ought to be kind of cautious of that. I think Dave Chappelle had a point when he said, when he was standing in line at the voting booth and listening to the dusty white people saying that Trump was going to be working for them, Dave Chappelle reflected on the fact, no, you idiots, he's working for me. And of course, Dave Chappelle is a very rich black man in America. Well, what's the point here? The point is that, what is a president, right? When you've got a state apparatus that just is doing what it's doing. That's a good question, I think. What value a man, an individual, has in a situation like that. Anyway, the reason why I brought that up in relation to Putin is because from where I sit, Putin also embodies someone quite different from what I'm used to when it comes to politicians, which is that they're all completely full of crap. Now, Putin's in a position at the moment where I think he's actually acting quite responsibly. I mean, fucking kill me for thinking so. I just, I want to be careful with my words here. A, because I could turn out to be wrong, and B, because I don't want to be cancelled before I've even like been like born, like right out of the gate. Cancelled in what sense? I mean, I don't actually think anyone is ever going to read this or listen to this. Um, I might have a couple followers. It's just myself on other accounts, just so I don't look like a total fucking loser. But I don't believe that this is going to be going anywhere. But nevertheless, I also don't know. I don't know what is likely to happen if one vocally expresses support for the enemy in your own country, of your own country, online or whatever. I don't know. I don't want to get raided or whatever. So, those minor fears exist, and I don't feel like I can be completely open and honest about my feelings for Putin, which it annoys me actually to hear just how deeply entrenched the anti-Russian sentiment is within the American mindset. I mean, I haven't spoken to a lot of Americans, but there are people who, on the topic of Palestine and Israel, pro-Palestinian, who recognize that it's a genocide and who are quite perhaps otherwise knowledgeable on the Israeli regime and so on, who don't seem to make the connection between Ukraine and Israel. I mean, I think look, I've got a couple of different directions I want to take this in, but I just want to say this, even though my conscience is telling me to shut up. I remember I've already said this. Maybe that's why my conscience is telling me to shut up. It doesn't want me to repeat myself and waste time. But it is really a case of knowing where the pieces on the board are. And if you're just supporting Palestine out of some moral position, I think that's problematic. It's not really engaging with the reality or the real of the problem, or with the symbolic structure at play, with the pieces on the board, which include Russia and Ukraine. Right? They're not unrelated. I don't think, in my opinion, I don't think that they're unrelated conflicts. And while and people forget, I think, that the America who's backing Israel in a genocide, all right, that same administration is backing Ukraine. And they've backed a lot of very unsavory characters throughout history and at present. So people ought to consider, and by the way, I'm not saying that Ukraine and the Ukrainians are like Israel and the Israelis. I don't know, right? There's a lot that's been said about the corruption, the criminal regime of Ukraine. I'm not going to tout it because I don't know. I'm not confident to say much about that. What I recognize, I think accurately, is that Ukraine is being destroyed, and it wouldn't be destroyed if it weren't for America. Now it's problematic. The proxy has been destroyed. Now, if you can't understand that basic fucking piece to the puzzle, and continue to insist on Russia being this authoritarian dictatorship that's just mowing down Ukraine because it's evil and wants to, blah blah blah. Then I mean I think you maybe might be a bit misinformed. Um, yeah, I'm just saying. I'm just saying. And I just want to say that I'm in the same boat, right? Because uh, I was depressed when a weapons expert, who I had some vague amount of trust in just because of the circles that he moves in, um, said that these weapons perhaps weren't as effective as Russia said. Because then, of course, I thought, oh, what? You're fucking telling me now that what Putin's just flexing uh, in the same way that fucking Gorka and Sullivan are flexing. Yeah, I mean, fuck, that I don't think I was thinking this at the time, and I wanted to just, kind of, I got kind of turned off politics at that point, um, and and at that point I kind of realized, well, perhaps what separates me from the animals is that I'm aware of my biases. I'm aware of propaganda, all right, and I'm aware of how it affects me. Um, and and it made me sympathetic to why it's not easy to just you know uh, to convince a person, say, that what they believe is a lie. um, what is it that Morty says to the Knights of the Sun when he's teaching them how the solar system works? All your fundamental beliefs are bullshit and your religion's a lie, or something like that. Right? People's sense of identity is built, I think, it's a fickle thing. Let's just say that it's a fickle thing, and people don't just believe what they believe because that's what they're told necessarily. It might be an act of some violence, and if we think about propaganda, or we think about um, what we consume in terms of information and so on, as a kind of drug, uh, and we're consuming this drug every day if we're watching the news, or if we're watching our favorite channels on YouTube that are delivering to us what we want to hear, uh, or whatever it happens to be, whether we want to hear it or not, it's delivering to us something that we identify with. If suddenly there's reason to cut off that, what is it, that drip feed, there's going to be some withdrawal, I think, and that's what I found myself doing, withdrawing a bit uh, from politics, but also withdrawing a little bit from life, insofar as politics doesn't just stay in some abstract transcendental realm of Congress, or on the other side of the world or whatever. It's very much seeped into the fabric of our realities in a very local way, and I think if there's a conclusion today, it's that something that I can conclude with today. It's that what we're faced with is a drug. And that this question of propaganda that we started with and moving along into just the general consumption of information. One framework in which we can begin to understand how we're implicated is how we're addicted.